Welcome to Storytime with Mr. B. Story 3, Building a Fort. Ellie Woozle and young Nelly Noodle, Ellie Woo and Nelly Noo for short, are my two pets. They are always finding themselves in new places, enjoying new experiences, and often creating a big mess for me, Mr. B, to tidy up. They love a little adventure and can often be found wandering out and about or making fun at home. They'd love you to join them. Close your eyes for a moment and picture Ellie Woozle and Nelly Noodle in your heads now. Think of their happy smiles, their waggy tails, and let them give you a cheeky wink. Shall we read on and see what adventures they've been having today? Now, dear reader, you might have gathered that Ellie Woozle and young Nelly Noodle spend a lot of time at home, often helping Mr. B with his endless list of jobs around the garden. The truth is, all three of them love it and are never happier than when outside pootling over here and then popping over there. They could spend days at a time just checking the hydrangeas or weaving their magnificent willow fence. But sometimes Mr. B has to go and do other jobs for other people. He doesn't mind because he likes a bit of variety and can be doing anything from lifeguarding to teaching young people much like yourselves. But always in the back of his mind, he's a little worried about what he's going to come home to. One such occasion happened on a rather sunny day in the middle of summer. Mr. B was out on one of his errands and Ellie Woo and Nelly Noo lay on their backs and watched the clouds flying by. As much as this is an excellent way to pass the time, looking for clouds shaped like dragons, big fish and other animals, Ellie Woo was beginning to feel a little restless. So she sat up and had a little look around. Now it just so happens that her eyes fell on a big old oak tree at the bottom of the garden. It had a lot of character, as many big old trees do, and happened to be one of Mr. B's favourite things. He would go and stand under that tree from time to time, looking up into the branches, or sometimes even climbing up to see what he could find. Oak trees are awesome for discovering wildlife, anything from bugs to beautiful birds. Ellie Woozle studied the tree for a while and then turned to Nelly Noo. "I think—" "Steady on," piped in Nelly Noo, grinning. "Hilarious. I think we should build a fort for Mr. B in the old oak tree." "Now, that is a rather wonderful idea," agreed Nelly Noo. "Let's go and have a look." They pootled down to the old oak tree and started examining the branches and twigs. Nelly Noodle was a slightly better climber and was very quick to shimmy up to a lovely wide area around 2 meters off the ground. Here, the tree broke into 3 branches, leading in different directions. Nelly Noo was delighted as it was the perfect platform for them to build up from. "Ellie Woo!" exclaimed Nelly Noo. "Come and have a look at what I have found. It's perfect." Ellie Woo quite agreed. "This is marvellous. Now we need to find some materials and tools to fix everything together." Mr. B had a wonderful tool shed. A place for everything and everything in its place was what he often found himself saying, while diligently hanging up his trusty spade or popping screws in jars to keep them away from car tires and the like. Obviously, Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo also loved this practice, as it meant they always knew where to find what they were looking for. Not that all the tools made it back to those locations, but that's another story. So, in they went, grabbing hammers, saws, screwdrivers, and all the other bits and bobs they thought might come in handy. They ran down to the oak tree and laid them on the grass, then thought better of it and put them all in a big bucket so they wouldn't go walkabout. Mr. B had already had a few issues with screwdrivers turning up in his lawnmower when he was mowing his mini meadow, which didn't always lead to his being particularly jolly. The next issue was finding the materials to actually attach to the tree. This proved to be a little more troublesome. There was lots of wood lying around, but all of it already had a purpose. The railway sleepers were being used for a raised bed, the pallets for the compost heaps, and the planks were dotted around the vegetable patches in an attempt to slow the ever-encroaching grass. Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo potted around, muttering to one another about what could be repurposed, as they put it. It just so happened that while this was going on, they were passing the chicken coop. Many chickens don't necessarily have the best of times in the various coops people have created for them, but that could never be said for Mr. B's chickens. They had ample room in the henhouse for strolling, perching and laying, and then they had a beautiful big wooden enclosure with sturdy fence posts, which meant they could wander around outside searching for grubs and little snacks. Even better than that, the whole henhouse extravaganza was on wheels, so Mr. B could move it to anywhere they suggested. Even so, as any chicken owner will tell you, chickens love to escape. They're never happier than when they're on the wrong side of the fence, and Mr. B's chickens were no exception. One particular chicken, called Charlie, as you might have guessed, was even more of an escape artist than the rest of her flock. So you can imagine her delight when she overheard Nelly New and Ellie Woo discussing just how they were going to source these critical bits of timber. "Ooh, ladies, I think I might have the answer to your problem," she cried. "Look at the wooden structure we're in. It's so sturdy, you could definitely take some of the planks and use them for your fort. Look at the pieces that run along the bottom. They're long and strong and only attached by a couple of screws. They would be easy to take off." "What a clever chicken!" exclaimed Nelly New. "The cleverest," agreed Ellie Woo. "Of course we can use them. I'll go and fetch the screwdriver." She was back in the wag of a tail, and alongside Nelly New set to work unscrewing the bottom of the coop, assisted most helpfully by Charlie Chicken. The planks came off very quickly, with the use of the tools, and were just as quickly taken down to the oak tree, where Nelly Noodle and Ellie Woozle set about building with gusto. They were both like little whirlwinds, attaching 2 planks to the tree first and then using them as a base to build a solid platform. They found some rope and made an amazing stepladder, and even had time to build a second, smaller platform that could be used as a seat. To be fair to them, they'd done a wonderful job. It's quite rare that Nelly Noodle and Ellie Woozle start a project and see it through more than halfway. They were feeling very chuffed with themselves. Of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, they hadn't seen Charlie Chicken ever so slowly lifting the side of the chicken fence, now much lighter after the floorboard weights had been lifted. And then, just as slowly, creeping out, fetching a stick to keep it up, and beckoning to the rest of her furtive flock to follow her. For every plank of wood that Nelly New and Ellie Woo attached, another chicken crept into the garden. There had been a bit of clucking the other night about how delicious Mr. B's beetroot and spinach was looking, so you can imagine where they headed first. Then, all of a sudden, a few things happened at once. The chickens were busy throwing little spinach plants into the air and scratching at the beetroot. Ellie Woo was congratulating herself on how clever an idea this had been. Nelly New was just beginning to notice the odd bit of greenery flying through the air as she looked up from the final screw, and at that rather untimely moment, Mr. B appeared, coming up the lane on his bicycle. "Quick!" cried Nelly New. "The chickens! Oh, biscuits!" said Ellie Woo, her tail wags slowing rather quickly. They both clambered down and hastily ran to stand in front of the now very mulch-like spinach and beetroot patch. Obliviously, Mr. B wandered into the garden, now pushing his bicycle at his side. It had been a particularly interesting day teaching about Italy in school. This had rather put him in the mood for something pasta-based with a hint of spinach for his tea, so accordingly he headed for the vegetable patches. Here he found 2 rather suspicious-looking young dogs. "Hey team, how are you both? Have you had a productive day?" he asked, a smile on his face. "It's been productive in some ways," replied a sheepish-looking Nelly New. "Yes, we've done something rather cool with the oak tree. You should go and have a look," agreed Ellie Woozle, thinking on her paws and trying to distract Mr. B. She had piqued his interest, and he was about to turn, but unfortunately there was a particularly large cluck as a juicy worm was unearthed by a pleasantly surprised chicken. "Oh my goody-goody gumdrops, how inconvenient," is what Mr. B likes to think he said. But it was something closer to "Blast and bother! What are these chickens doing in my vegetable garden?" He went and inspected the chicken coop and quickly surmised what might have happened. Luckily for Nelly New and Ellie Woo, Mr. B was quite a handyman and loved to have a bit of wood lying around for just such an occasion. "You never know when a piece of wood might come in handy," was another one of his popular sayings. On this occasion, the spare wood would be handy to use for the repairing of the coop, as taking a fort down can be a little more complex than putting one up, and Mr. B was secretly quite impressed with the fort when he had time to inspect it later in the day. He set to work fixing the coop while Nelly New and Ellie Woo did their best to keep the chickens off what was left of the beetroot. It was safe to say spinach was not going to be on the menu that evening. The next task was getting the birds back into the coop, which, as any chicken owner will tell you, is a favourite game for chickens. They love a bit of hide and catch, and for the next half an hour, Mr. B, aided clumsily by his two canine companions, chased chickens around the garden, the yard, and the tool shed. There were chickens in the wheelbarrow, chickens on the roof, and chickens under the hedge. Cheeky Charlie Chicken had even managed to sneak into the house, where she was quite content, thank you very much, and not very keen to vacate. But after a few tumbles into the compost and a slight trip over some plant pots, all the chickens were safely back in their coop, with extra leaves of spinach secretly stashed under their wings for a little supper before bedtime. Mr. B had planned on going to the gym that evening, but didn't feel the need after 20 laps of the garden. So instead, he instructed Nelly New and Ellie Woo to put his tools back into the shed and headed inside to prepare some dinner. Nelly suggested that instead of spinach, the pasta might taste great with a sprinkling of sausage. But Mr. B was on a bit of a short-lived health kick, so he stuck to just vegetables, and it was still very delicious. The light was beginning to fade when he finally came back outside to admire the treehouse, a cup of tea made with freshly picked mint in his hand. The platform was perfectly placed to observe the vibrant pink and orange sunset. Nelly New and Ellie Woo crept up to join him, snuggling into his sides and looking out over the surrounding fields away to the sea. "What am I going to do with you two?" Mr. B sighed with a smile on his face. "You could give us some bacon for breakfast," suggested Nelly New hopefully, her tail beginning to wag. "That's not quite what I had in mind," replied Mr. B, "but maybe a cooked breakfast would be nice tomorrow morning." Mr. B loved his two little puppies. All dogs were puppies in Mr. B's eyes, and had quite forgiven them. They all watched the sun vanish over the horizon and began to climb down so they could head to bed. Mr. B had just reached the ground when, "Ooh!" he cried, reaching for his foot. He'd just trodden on a rather well-hidden hammer. The end. Thank you for watching. All the stories we've gone through so far, Story 1, Story 2 and Story 3 were written by me and illustrated by me, Mr. B. I'm Mr. B, this is Hunter. Like and subscribe and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.